Okay, welcome. This is the last session in the community track. I'm Puya. If you want to leave early, please leave so quietly. Respect the panel and everyone who wants to still listen to it. With that said, have fun with this panel of esteemed panelists. They're going to talk about self-care and burnout, because this is a super important issue. It's going to be moderated by Aaron Crickenberger from Google. Next to him, Rithu, Leena, no, Rithu, Leena is there from Lyft, Ashley McNamara from Microsoft, Stephen Augustus from VMware, and Noah Kantrowitz from Ridecell. Welcome. Have fun.
So actually, before we started, since it's the last talk of the day, we wanted to, I actually wanted to do this for all my talks, but I think we should take a group selfie. Can we do that? Yeah?
Do it.
Real quick?
We have to do it before you leave.
Yeah, everyone.
Early. To catch
The
your
room looks
flights.
a lot more impressive now.
Can you guys stand up so we can see you? Thank you. Can we fix the exposure? Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks all.
And that was our talk. No?
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. All right, good evening or afternoon, everyone. I am Aaron of Sigbeard, also known as Aaron Crickenberger. You might also know me as the dude who, after KubeCon Seattle in 2018, tweeted that, hey, I think it's time we talk about mental health and burnout, because I know I wasn't the only person who broke down in tears. I ran into multiple people who talked about it, and I asked, like, did anybody talk about that this week? As a result, some of you may have gone to the OSMI booth in the vendor hall this week, or maybe you went to the mental health talk, the very first session on the first day about mental health in tech. I got to shake the hand of the speaker who said that I was the reason she was here. But I'd like to think that you all are the reason that we are talking about mental health, and I just wanted to thank you all for that. I also managed to get 4 suckers to get up on stage and talk about mental health. And so I thought I would, I'm good, thanks though. I thought I would introduce Ashley McNamara, Stephen Augustus, Noah, I can't pronounce your last name, and Rithu, Leena, and let them tell you sort of their story about why they are here and what burnout means to them. So Ashley, we'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Ashley McNamara. Thank you for being here. Most of you are my friends. That's cool. Thanks for showing up. So I am I burn out a lot, or at least I used to burn out a lot. I'm an overachiever. I want to get things done. I'm also a single mom, so that means that when I burn out, I am not there for my kid. So the last couple of years, I've been really, really protective of my time. I'm also a manager now, so I'm very protective of my reports time. So I no longer burn out because I say no, which is really, really important and really, really hard. But I think that it starts with management. Truly, it does. And we can talk about that more later, but I want to get on to Stephen.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Stephen Augustus. I'm a senior cloud native architect at VMware. So I've done a few jobs across the IT space, corporate IT. Right now I'm doing cross between field engineering and pre and post sales. So a lot of the experiences that I've had in the IT field have essentially been at small and mid businesses where you are kind of the owner of everything if you're working on that stuff. And it's very easy, one, I'm kind of a control freak about some of the things that I work on. So it's very easy to want to have your hands in things constantly. And I think that one of the things I want to talk about most is like trust. Right, trust in the team that you work with, trust in the managers that you have, and in the company overall that you get up and go to get out of bed for every day. Because I think that it starts with the people that are around you, and it's very easy if you don't have that trust to think that you need to take on all of these things by yourself. So.
I'm Noah Kantrowitz. I am an engineering manager, I guess now, at Ridecell. So my path to here, I've been doing open source community work for 15-ish years now, and I tend to, let's say, run a little hot. I am extremely passionate about making sure that I have good experiences for the users of my software, and will tend to defend that basically to a man. But my sort of big thing these days has been trying to understand empathy in open source interactions and figuring out how to deal with communities where everyone is doing things for a reason. And maybe that isn't always the right thing to do, but people do things because they thought it was the right thing to do, and practicing empathy in all of our interactions.
Hi, good evening. Thank you once again for coming to our talk so late. Really appreciate it. I'm Rithu John. I'm an open source maintainer of Dex, which is a federated identity provider for Kubernetes. I work at Lyft doing open source things. And the reason I'm on this panel to talk to you today was there was a phase in my life when I was extremely stressed and super overworked being an open source maintainer. And I almost didn't admit it to myself. I thought this was expected of you as a contributor to open source. And I actually needed some friends at work to pull me out and be like, hey, what you're doing is way too much. So I think like any 5-step recovery process, acceptance is one of the most difficult steps. And I'm here to tell you that burnout is a lot more common than you think it is. It's really healthy to talk about it. And if we can, as a community, can help each other, I think that would be the best possible outcome.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to kind of jump ahead a little bit because I did a lot of research for this panel, even though I'm not supposed to be the one doing all the talking. And I felt like most of what I found was stuff that talked about how what I can do to deal with my burnout. I learned a lot of stuff about self-care and a lot of stuff about boundaries. And that's great. It's very empowering for me as a person. But I also learned that burnout is about sort of the disconnect between the individual and the organization. And I feel like I've heard too much about what the individual can do for themselves and not enough about what sort of the organization can do to help resolve that disconnect. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about, what would you suggest that we as a community do to better help with burnout?
So, like I said earlier, I'm very protective of my team in burnout. A burnt out person on my team is no good to me. They're probably going to leave if they're burnt out. So if I see somebody is attending too many conferences or too many talks or staying up too late on Slack or sending emails at 11, I will definitely intervene in a one-on-one. And there's also kind of a two-pronged thing because we are developer advocates, so we are always on the road. And at conferences, you see a lot of the same speakers. Lots of them are developer advocates. So I also suggest that my people find somebody within the community that's an underrepresented person and give them an opportunity to have the stage instead of always taking the stage themselves, because we don't always have to be on the road. There's other things that we could be doing. So it definitely starts with your management. People will definitely overwork themselves if they are passionate about something, but I think it's our responsibility as managers to step in and kind of tell them to pump the brakes a little bit.
So I definitely agree on the manager side. I've been fortunate for the last few jobs to have excellent managers that care about me, right? They'll, talk over dinner and do things like that, and really make sure that the things that I'm working on are things that make me happy. Like one, I will only do good work if I'm happy. So I try to seek out things that make me happy. From the Kubernetes community perspective, my goal has been to find things that people don't commonly touch. So I'm like the dark spaces of the community. So I'm one of the chairs for SIG PM. I'm one of the chairs for SIG Azure, commonly lesser known or attended SIGs. Also one of the chairs for SIG Release. The conversations that we have around the work that we do in the community, I think that it's very important to grasp some of these aspects and build process around it, because the only way for us to onboard new people into the process, like part of the reason that we get burnt out is because we're doing something by ourselves, right? So the only way to onboard new people to these processes or actually build them in the first place, right? So you take someone like me who is, chairs a few things and has done 6 talks for and track hosting for KubeCon, and then you take someone like Aaron who is on the steering committee. He is co-chair for SIG testing. He was a release team lead last cycle. It's one of those things where like you have to trust more people to be able to build the real community around some of the things that you do to be successful. So that's I'm moving away from the doing everything by myself and trying to move towards the okay, here's a piece that I think we can chunk up and give to you. So.
Would you say that 6 talks is an easy path to burnout, Stephen?
I've had a lot of fun at KubeCon. But it's definitely something I don't suggest doing every KubeCon.
I ended up doing 7 at KubeCon Seattle, so I think you're safe. 7's too much, but 6 is totally fine.
It's just right. I'm going to go down to 5 for San Diego.
So, in addition to agreeing with everything that my colleagues have said so far, I think a big structural thing that does not get nearly enough attention is funding models. Fortunately for Kubernetes Core, we have the benefit of many kind sponsors helping to keep the project alive, both with donating full-time engineers and with donating money and other resources. But there's still a lot of other projects in the sort of Kubernetes ecosystem that are entirely volunteer run, that are extremely critical to making sure that the entire world keeps spinning, and trying to figure out how do we get those projects to be funded sustainably, to make sure that they are maintained to the level that we all expect, without expecting that the maintainers will work for free forever. That's, I think, a thing that we need to start to discuss more too.
I have a quick question for the audience. How many of you have spent some time on the GitHub dashboard figuring out how many PRs you've contributed to a certain project? The others are probably lying. I'm sure everyone spends some time on that dashboard, and I've done it myself. I feel like everyone's striving to be that top contributor to a project, and I think we do a great job of celebrating the top contributors, and probably even the people who are pretty new to the community. But we often tend to forget that middle tier of people who are doing their work very diligently, but don't get celebrated as much. So as a community, I think we can dedicate some more effort to that for sure. And another thing is, I think a lot of people have the tendency to look to the leaders of the community to kind of follow patterns and follow the tones that they've set. So if a leader is overworking themselves and like stresses themselves and overcommits, people in the community tend to follow the same ritual. So if the leaders can kind of adopt a more healthy pattern, I think that would help the community as a whole.
Cool. So I think one of the things I really enjoy about the Kubernetes community in particular, compared to any other open source project that I've worked in, is that I had people like reach out to me. Just apropos of nothing, like, you doing okay there? Or, gee, I see you're in a lot of places. It's happened multiple times this week over this conference too. I just wanted to illustrate one of them real fast, where we were all supposed to meet up beforehand this morning, and I kind of overslept. I didn't quite make it there because I had been up until midnight hanging out with 20 or 30 of my closest friends, and then I came back and I had to respond to some emails from people who are in a time zone that is not here. And I told Noah that I was feeling kind of guilty and bad about that, and felt really bad that I had overslept. And Noah, what was it that you told me instead of oversleep?
You slept enough to be here and your best self.
Yeah. And I thought that was great. Noah was very empathetic. Do y'all have a time you feel like somebody from the community has sort of reached out to you like that, helped you out?
So I draw Gophers. Thank you to the people in the audience for wearing my Gopher t-shirts. I started out with a Halloween gopher, and it kind of spiraled from there, and now tons and tons and tons of projects have gophers. I've made hundreds of gophers. I do this in my spare time, which means I work all day, and then I go home and I draw gophers. It's not just an evening thing, it takes me like a week to get one done. So I was definitely burning myself out on that alone, and my good friend Steve Francia said, can you just stop? No, I can't. Who else is going to do this? So I sent out a tweet, like, are there any other designers out there? Please tell me there are other designers out there. So now I have a list of people that I can refer people to, and I'm better about saying no. But I felt like I needed to do that because people were relying on me. I didn't feel like there was anyone else that could do that, which is ridiculous. There are hundreds of people, thousands of people that could be drawing things. But maybe not for free. But I digress.
So on my side, definitely, I think, that Aaron and I, we actually talked about it this week. Aaron said, hey, do you want to be my workout buddy? And I was like, what? I don't really work out. But what he meant was, we have a lot of things that are on our plates collectively, and that it would be good to turn down on some of those things or figure out how to transfer it. And he would be essentially, my spiritual partner in terms of figuring out how to do that. And this talk itself, I think, was synthesized from all of us being burnt out at KubeCon Seattle and just sitting down, people were inviting us out and like, hey, we're going for this dinner. And I was like, I don't want to see people at all right now. And but we were all on Twitter talking about like, I'm in my hotel, the room, like I've got the curtain shut, like I'm not talking to people right now outside of my internet friends. And we were all talking about burnout, and then we were like, wait, we should talk about it on a stage, right? So this is the second time we're doing this panel, and I think that, just having the communication, having the open communication, like I think that's what's most important. So all the things that we're talking about, talking with your managers, talking with the community, talking with people who can fund these efforts, it's all about being like incredibly vocal about the fact that we're all feeling the same way there,
So yeah, my favorite example of this is actually the one that Nikita showed in her keynote earlier in the week, the picture of the silly hat nights in the SIG contributor experience meetings. It's actually been one of the high points of working with SIG contributor experience is that we make sure to take time in the SIG to treat each other like people instead of cogs in a machine that slowly close GitHub issues. I think that's really been one of the reasons why I've been able to stick around in the community as long as I have.
So I used to be the kind of person who would get a GitHub notification at 12 a.m. in the night. It will be some random stranger on the internet saying, hey, I want this feature out of Dex tomorrow. And I would feel guilty enough to spend my entire night working on that feature and delivering it. Probably not to get a lot of gratitude at the end, but I would do it anyway. And two of my friends sat me down and had me practice saying no to people. And this helped me a lot. So I think just being there for one another, and if you see somebody going through this, call it out and try to help them out of it. That's the biggest ask we can ask from our community, right? Because I feel like that goes a very, very long way. Something that's helped me a lot is just turning off that GitHub notifications after I leave work. And I feel like trying to find that right balance is key. And if we as a community can keep emphasizing that, that'll go a really long way.
So quick shout out to Dalton Hubble, actually, who's probably one of the people you're talking about.
Yep.
So Dalton is one of the maintainers of Typhoon, Kubernetes distribution. And if you've ever, I follow his repo because I used to do a fork of Typhoon. And if you ever take a look at Dalton's close notifications, basically for people who request features that he's just not going to work on, they're brilliant. I mean, Dalton's cracking up, but I mean, they're brilliant. I think they're not too curt, but they're saying like, I respect my time and I respect the direction of this project, and I know that this is a feature I'm not going to implement, right? So being able again to have those clear boundaries about what you will and won't work on is good.
That is powerful. But like seriously, unless there's like an outage, anything can wait until tomorrow. Nothing is an emergency.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things I've tried I made a README for myself in GitHub, which just feels like the height of ego. But it's there. And one of the things I put in it is that here's how you can reach me. Right now, since I'm all about Kubernetes Slack is the only place that actually notifies me. But it only notifies me during business hours. And then everything else is explicitly best effort. Email, personal or corporate, internal chat, all that stuff. And then I say that GitHub notifications are effectively useless and go to dev null. I feel really bad about that though, because it's like I'm like throwing away my responsibility. How do you all deal with GitHub notifications and keeping up on the PRs or issues that you think you're supposed to be working on?
I do the same. Everything is shut off at 5. Everything. I tweeted about this recently. I got a lot of retweets. Everything is shut off at 5. If it is a true emergency, people have my number. They can call me. But otherwise, I am very, very strict about my time. As a single mom, after 5, that is my time with my kid. After 9, when he goes to sleep, that is my time. I am not getting back on my computer. I need my time so I'm not murdering people the next day. It's not for me, it's for you.
So I'm not sure that I've found the right balance for this just yet. I try to not look at certain notifications. I also try to delineate the Kubernetes that I do for work and Kubernetes that I do for play. So there are certain efforts that we drive at VMware that I need to be ahead of, and those are the ones that I will work on during the workday. And like Cluster API, Azure is something that I will maintain in the nighttime if I feel like it. But outside of that, it's right, notifications, try to get the notifications off. Try not to, unless it's an emergency, don't answer it. Right, like people know how to reach you. I think that this definitely comes from time in SRE and production engineering. I was working at a late stage startup who had acquired another startup, and they had spent a year of developer time basically integrating their AWS infrastructure into their bare metal infrastructure, and they were like, we're not going to do that again. We're just going to find one person who can do that. And so I started building out this bridge between these two infrastructures, but I was on, basically I was 24/7 on call for that product team. I was also occasionally in the global operations on call. So I found myself working 14-hour, 15-hour days sometimes, and I was like, okay, well, it's time to leave this job,
So I also am very, very defensive of my phone and what is allowed to notify me, especially what is allowed to make noise. The things that are allowed to make my phone beep are very limited to friends and family, not really even work stuff. My boss, I think, I did whitelist him, but
So if I call you now, well, what'll...
it would not make my phone make noise. But yeah, also, I am not a big fan of technical solutions to social problems, but I will say that GitHub has a lot of metadata in their email notifications, and I am the kind of dork that writes a lot of proc mail filters around those, and that has been actually fairly effective at tracking things like, was this a PR that I have commented on? Was this PR that I opened? And using those to help to prioritize things versus just sort of the raw feed of everything that's going on in Kubernetes.
Don't ever do that. That's impossible.
I actually did at one point read every single thing that went into the enhancements repo, every comment.
Noah.
That was, to be fair, this was a year and a half ago. It's gotten a lot, let's not say worse. It's gotten better. Things are moving faster. I wouldn't recommend that anybody try to keep up with that fire hose anymore, though.
Yeah, like I said before, I do turn off my GitHub notifications as soon as I leave work. And even during the workday, when I do get, let's say, an issue about Dex, I try to realize how important it is. If someone's calling out a security bug, that's probably something I should fix immediately, and I'm very thankful to this person. But otherwise, I try to respond with a milestone, or I point them to my roadmap, which I usually define very well, and say, hey, this doesn't really fit right now in the roadmap. I will try to address it later, or I'm open to somebody else opening a PR and I'll review it. But I try to categorize it so that I point them to my roadmap and say it doesn't really fit, or I can address it at a later time. And that's worked out pretty well.
So two things in terms of filtering. If you're on the if you're in the Kubernetes community. There's a thread maybe 2 years ago or something about like Tim Hawkins' email filters that is pretty good. So I've like adapted something that's similar to that, like in P0s and P1s if I'm assigned or commented on something. There's also a really good recent plugin. I don't remember who created it, but shout out to anyone on Testinfra who worked on that, where they basically scan for the GitHub busy status. So if you set your busy status right now and you work on Kubernetes, the bots that will assign reviewers to PRs will skip you, essentially.
I don't know if I see Christoph in the room, but that would be Christoph.
Christoph is, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Christoph. So they actually sent out an email before we started KubeCon and said like, hey, we're turning this bot on. Can you make sure that you set your busy statuses? So everyone who is here who has set a busy status should not be assigned as a reviewer or approver for a PR right now.
It's probably obvious, but like everybody has a different system. And my point of asking the question was I don't think it is a solvable problem. Like I think you just find whatever works for you. And it's not that important at the end of the day compared to your health.
It's not, and that's why you reading those articles, trying to search for answers, you needed to just think about what was good for you.
Touche. So on that note, like what one thing would you want somebody to walk out of this room with? If they remember one thing, what's your message?
Shut it down at 5.
Talk to people. You have a community around you. You have friends that care about you. You have people in your company that care about you. So make sure that you are making like your feelings known.
To steal a phrase from the YouTube community, imagine others complexly. That everyone that is involved in Kubernetes, even if you only see them as lines of text on the screen, is a person and is doing their best. And if they can't do a thing, it's probably for a good reason.
Yeah, along the same lines, be empathetic to the people who you work with. Do unto others what you want to be done unto yourselves. I think that goes a long way. And I've gotten issues before where you're like, oh, I need you to fix this immediately. Just be a little more kind with your words. I mean, everyone's doing the best they can. So empathy does go a long way.
Also, Kubernetes is pretty fucking awesome right now. And like, chances are, new features and things like that, not really make or break for life or death situations anymore. Like hopefully people aren't using Kubernetes to power their, I don't know, radiation machines and various, I don't know, what other life or death situations.
737s? Or?
Yeah, like let's no, we're not running nuclear missiles, we're not running airplanes, everyone can just sort of like, occasionally it's easy to get caught up in how much we want to see things improve, but you can occasionally sort of reorient yourself and try to remember that people are always more important than technology.
Well, I mean, one more thing about that, like we are also a global community, so it's so I think being kind of present about the time zones that people might live in and how they might feel obligated to respond to something, even if it's an off time for them. So definitely consider that as you decide to like, hey, I need my thing right now, please.
Cool. Yeah, not to end it on a super serious note before we go to questions, but in all of the reading that I looked at, first off, I think a common theme I hear here is take breaks and get away from it. It's not that important. So I hear that expressed sometimes. I'm like, have a hobby that doesn't involve computers, or shut it down at 5, go live your life, or maybe go on a 3-day weekend or go take a vacation or something. Or if it's really bad, see if you can, find a way to disconnect. It's difficult. I think a lot of the people here may be privileged enough that you can take that time off, really. Not everybody is in that situation, and that's unfortunate. But recognize that you may not be as trapped as you think you are. But something that's pretty important to me is to not underestimate burnout. I heard somebody talk about how they felt really burnt out, and then they went on like a 3-day vacation to Ireland, and they came back and they felt better, so they weren't burnt out anymore. That's not burnout. Right? That's just like being really stressed out, and it's totally cool, and it's okay to get stressed out and all that stuff. Burnout to me, I felt like I got a more visceral depiction of that from this talk by Jérôme Petazzo, formerly of Docker. It's called Le plus grand refactoring difficile de ma vie, the most difficult refactoring of my life. And he talked about how he read up a ton about burnout, and he saw all these talks about burnout, and he felt super educated about it, and it totally wouldn't happen to him. And then things stopped getting fun. And then he had trouble sleeping, and he had trouble eating, and all that stuff. And it took him a while to realize, oh, maybe he was burnt out. And he finally did something about it. He took like a 2-week break, and he came back, and he thought he was better. And then kind of came back to that place again. And finally realized he needed a super hard break. And again, fortunate enough to be able to take that. But it took months of time to walk away from it. That can be very real and very difficult, which is why it's so important to talk about it early on, take breaks and catch it early on. But I just want to stress the importance of, like, if you take a break and you come back and you still feel the same way, that's okay. It's not you. You're not broken. Like, burnout is very tough and difficult. We're all here to talk about it. So with that.
Well, like, when you're on your deathbed, you guys, are you gonna be like, man, I'm super glad I worked 15-hour days instead of living my life? Probably not,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to open it up to questions from the audience. I'm so thrilled to get this wonderful panel of panelists here. Amazed to be up on stage with them. I figured maybe you have some questions for them.
I know that Aaron asked what the community and organization can do to help prevent burnout, and it seemed like a lot of the answers were specific or more focused on what leaders in the community can do. Are there things that people who are still newer to the community or not necessarily leaders can do to help with other people's burnout?
I'm trying to, I think I heard the question is what I heard, how can people outside of the community, like, how can we help each other with burnout? Is that what I heard?
I think it's like leader.
I'm asking
like
mainly what
versus...
people who are not in leadership positions can do to help out with burnout, I guess.
Got
So
you.
I will just answer real briefly. A number of the people who reached out to me and made me think like, oh wow, somebody noticed this and somebody cares, were people who were not leaders. They're just other people like me, which is actually more meaningful and important to me. It felt like somebody, you know, right alongside me is going through the same thing, which was really empowering.
That was going to be my answer, but to add on to that, like, when somebody reaches out to listen to them, they're noticing something, and it's obvious, so listen to them.
Yeah, I would say, again, it really comes back to communication. I think that, you know, in some of the roles that we're in, we don't realize that we are leaders. Like, Ashley, you actually have a management role, and you also have a management role, but Rithu, myself, and Aaron are senior engineers, essentially, right? But, you know, the things that we do on the community side is, you know, are kind of leadership-y, right? So I think it's hard to draw that boundary between the two. But like some of the work that happens in, I think, like recognizing a problem in general, having a discussion about it, and figuring out how to automate it away, maybe, right? I think that, you know, the work that Kantrowitz does, the work that TestInfra does, is incredibly important to our community. And I think it's all because it's cognizant of the real problems that we have day to day. It's like, I don't want to review PRs at certain times, or I don't want to have to go through this process, or I don't want to have to check for spell checks, or like really simple things that like remove that burden, recognizing that and trying to help people because you realize I'm not the only one who might be having this problem, I think is important. So.
It's also getting a little bit off topic, but leadership in open source projects, probably, it's a lot less solid than it may look from the outside. Leaders in open source communities are generally the people that show up. So if you think you're not in a leadership role and you'd like to help, congratulations, you can become a leader. Just show up and do the work, and you will help the people beside you and behind you.
Yeah, and I think something that everybody can do is if you see that anybody in the project is getting a little bit burnt out, you can always reach out and be like, hey, I have some spare time, I can help out. a lot of leaders have have a little bit of trouble delegating. So if you can make that first step and be like, hey, I have some free time, I'll do it, they'll be more than happy to go
here's all my stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this covers a little bit of the same, but basically if you have a colleague, I'm not in a leadership position, but I have a colleague that I'm seeing kind of pretends to be Superman, and I'm seeing that I don't think this is going to work out in the long run, but they have not burned out yet, but I'm trying to help, but they seem, oh, it's fine, I can do this, it's no problem, do you have a good advice or advice to see how can I help them realize that they need to look more seriously to this?
That's difficult. You're doing a good job by saying something and offering to help, but sometimes you can't save people from themselves, and they have to learn the hard lesson first, unfortunately.
You can check in on more specific things. Ask them hey, I remember that you used to talk about books a lot. What have you read lately? Try to sort of remind them about the outside world can sometimes help.
There's actually a simple social trick to that. If that person doesn't listen to you, find somebody who has an authority, the social authority for that person, and convince to convey this message, and then he will listen. At least slightly he will listen if he doesn't listen to you. Because it's important, at least he should know that when he will start feeling bad, will start feeling burnout, he should just approach and start talking. And this is the simple trick.
So Gwen's got her hand up next.
Hey, yeah, so as a person who feels really new to the tech community, even though I've been here a while, I still feel new because there's so much to learn all the time. So I am struggling with learning all the things, and I feel that because I'm learning all the time, I'm also slower at the work that I do. So I feel often this pressure to work more because it takes me longer to get things done, and if I'm measuring things by how much I get done, it just takes me longer than other people, or I think so maybe, or I don't know. What would you tell someone who's learning and working to how to manage that?
I am my own worst enemy. I do this exact same thing. Since I don't have a CS degree, I'm self-taught. I feel like I need to know all of the things all of the time. It took me a really long time to understand that I did not need to know all of the things all of the time. But something that I do, especially for learning, as advocates, we learn all day, every day. So for my reports and for myself, we block out time during the workday to learn things. I don't see any reason why other managers don't do that, especially if it pertains to your job. If you're contributing to open source and it's a product that you're using for your job, you should be able to take time during your workday to contribute to that.
So I think one, it's important to realize you're not that new. And two, that working at small businesses or startups or in the open source community is like a time multiplier, right? So working on Kubernetes for a year is like doing something for 5 years. And and as Ashley was saying, you don't need to know it all. I think what's really important is to try to target 1 to 3 things that you're really interested in and find the time to work on those things. It's there's the whole, practicing for a coding interview or something like that, right? And you're learning all these questions that you end up not using at the job. You're like, I don't need to implement doubly linked lists in my day-to-day work, right? So why do I need to learn it for this interview, right? So choosing the things that you actually need to learn and care about are important.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hello. I noticed one thing as I've been talking to people throughout the conference is that a lot of people who are paid to work on Kubernetes and CNCF stuff is that they are paid to work on things that help out their vendor, but then they also really care about the community, and so they're on SIG contributor experience, they're on SIG docs, they're on SIG testing too. And what is contributing to their burnout is that that's not what they're getting their bonuses for, that's not what's going to their 9 to 5, that's not what they're getting paid for, right? So like, how do you help them juggle between they're getting paid or whatever, like that's what they're putting in all their work for, but then they're, on top of that, they're doing all these other things to help the Kubernetes community as well. Like, how do you juggle trying to make the community better, but then also trying to do, I guess, your job?
As one of those individuals who suffers from that compulsion, I remember attending this talk at an open source leadership summit last year by Maggie Pint about, talking about open source and business. And she had this quote I loved, which is like, you can't talk to your developers about like, what is the business value of open source? Because they care about open source like they care about their dog. It's their favorite thing, it brings them joy. And like, what is the business value of your dog, right? But I asked but that conversation has to happen somewhere, right? Like somebody has to have that conversation to understand like, what is the business value of open source? Why are we investing it? And in that conversation, part of it has to be that the community brings value, that the community is like, it can sort of help scale and empower the business. Like the only possible way that I will get out of working on all of the things that I work on is not if I petition for increased headcount from my company and get them to work on a bunch of the same stuff. It's to like sort of get the community to sort of raise the pool a little bit and share the work that way. And since I do happen to work for a company that has products that are based on this open source project, like the health of this project directly corresponds to the health of the product and all of the revenue and stuff that we're gonna be making as well. Like it's a little bit tougher to draw that dotted line and connect all of the dots. But like at the end of the day, an unhealthy open source project will not have users who want to pay my company money to use the commercial version of that.
Yeah, and to add to your point, so I used to get paid for this at CoreOS. I no longer do, but I feel like the reward attached to contributing to open source is a lot higher because you learn a lot more and you learn a lot faster. The quality of code in open source is usually much higher than you'll find at any cooperation. So that's something to take away. Once you know those standards and you know that quality, you can bring it back to your company and try to implement that internally.
Also, as a more Kubernetes specific thing, and again, I can mostly speak to Contrib-X because that's where I spend a lot of my time. We recently had someone that had to step back for a couple of weeks, and I was very impressed with the degree to which the whole SIG entirely supported that person. This was a no questions asked, we totally understand, take some time and come back and do your thing. And that is a culture that I think that we can all reinforce and improve in all of our SIGs.
Yeah, I think it's important to like write a little, think about your, the model of how you do work. So I was mentioning earlier that I try to delineate between the Kubernetes that I do for work and the Kubernetes that I try to do for play. So like I am in a customer facing role. I technically, I should be doing a lot less community work, but I'm allowed to do that because it's valuable to the company, right? But I think that, for people who are at companies where they don't have that opportunity, it is important to delineate the two. So.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, hi. So we've been talking about different strategies, how we can prevent burnouts, but my question is, how are they really effective from your experience? So how often do you have burnouts right now, let's say? How often, let's say, how much time per year or something like that? Any metrics?
As someone that's been doing this a long time, I don't even think that I could quantify it in terms of how often. It's more of just how much today. It ebbs and flows, and there are definitely periods of a couple months, usually a couple months each year, where I'm just like, nope, to hell with it, not really gonna do software in my spare time. I'm gonna go play video games or make candy or make stickers or do something that is not in front of a computer. But it's not really a thing that has like a defined start and end. It's like a weather report. How much is it going to rain today?
Same answer.
I think, I was going to say, one of the big personal metrics that Jerome quoted in his talk is like when things that used to be fun are no longer fun. Like I find there are periods of time where it's like, I don't want to watch anything, I don't want to read anything, I don't want to play anything. Everything I play on my guitar isn't really working, even the drums is boring. That's a danger sign for sure. And there's nothing I can do about it in the moment other than recognize it. It's helpful.
And something that happens once burnout happens is that like it's important to realize that it's a cycle, right? You kind of like do like, oh crap, it happened, and it doesn't really go away, right? You feel better after a while, and you kind of put blockers in place to protect yourself, whether it's people, whether it's the kind of things that you work on day to day, but it doesn't go away, right? So it is really important to recognize when it's happening to you and find a way to step back.
And we're going to let Chase close us out here, but if you want to leave, you can leave because it's that time.
Okay, well then I'll say what everybody in here is thinking, which is thank you for this moment with us. Thank you for sharing in such a vulnerable and transparent way. That's really kind of you all. This is a beautiful gift. Thank you. How do you deal with the pause penalty, which is when I stop, nothing around me stops, and it just means that when I come in after whatever rehabilitation period I take for myself, things are just 10 times worse. Like, what are some practical things that you can do about that? How do you deal with that? Like, for example, I'm imagining my inbox when I get back to work, on Monday is going to be just like,
So I think, so I had mentioned earlier that I think it's important to put some sort of process in place. I'm definitely feeling exactly what you're saying right now with the SIG PM and some of the Azure stuff and release stuff, and saying like, okay, well we need more process, right? We need so when someone steps back, right, we know exactly what to do, right? There's one of the examples is the patch release management, the patch release manager for the release team, or for SIG release overall, right? That is one person who signs up to do a job, and they essentially sign up to do this job for the entirety of that Kubernetes minor release cycle, right? Which is essentially a year, which I don't think people realize when they start to do it, right? So, one of the things that we're putting in place is a patch release management team, right? So it's not just one person, there's no bus factor anymore. And, I think that figuring out where those stopping points are, where that pause penalty is going to happen, and trying to build process around it so people understand what happens when people step back is huge.
In addition to the process answer, which is the first thing you have to do, but the second is just trust in the people in your teams, building trust that they will soldier on, and things will keep happening, and if they really need you for something, they'll reach out, but that they're good people, and that none of us are so important that we should ruin ourselves.
Exactly, that project is not going to die without you.
Yeah.
Those emails, you could probably delete them, nobody's going to care.
If it's important, you'll email again, right?
Yeah, I'm very unapologetic about taking Slack time. I'm here for a week. It's going to at least take 2 weeks to recover from all of this, at least. And like, that's okay. I've told myself, like, that's just the way it is. Anybody who has a problem with that is not me, and is not experiencing my state of mind right now,
So who took a week off after KubeCon? Because I know I did, right?
Yep.
Who should have?
Nice. All right, well, thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you to all of our panelists here, Ashley, Stephen, Noah, Rithu. Let's all get hand.